Hello and welcome to the complete reading comprehension course for the GMAT. If you want to know all the tips and tricks to get a really high score on this section of the GMAT exam, you better stay tuned. Just to remind you, this is the fourth video of our complete GMAT course, so you also have to watch all those videos in order to be up to date. So just to talk a little about the reading comprehension section of the GMAT. Well, this is a very important section. Okay, it's extremely important, like all the other sections, right? Everything is important on the GMAT, but the peculiarity, let's say, of the reading comprehension section is that it's going to take you a long time to improve, okay? So in the short term, it might seem as if you are not making as much improvement as in the other sections, and that's totally normal. Okay, that's normal. I'm not saying that's good, but that's normal. Now, with reading comprehension, there's one thing that you have to have in mind at all times. In order for you to take the GMAT, in order for you to start an efficient GMAT preparation, you should have a high command of the English language, especially when you read. Your command of the English language, especially when you read, has to be high. Because there are tons of students who start the preparation for the GMAT maybe when they shouldn't, maybe when they are not ready. Okay, because their knowledge, especially of words, of vocabulary, is not good enough. So you first need to assess your level before you start preparing for the GMAT. Okay, the GMAT is only for those who have a high command of English. If you want, let's say, a decent score, okay, anything above 600, okay, is decent. And it's very important for you to be able to read a newspaper article, to be able to read a magazine and understand it fully. Okay, if you see that when you read a newspaper you can't understand what they are saying there, most likely the GMAT will eat you alive. Okay, the GMAT is not the TOEFL, the GMAT is not the IELTS. And this section, reading comprehension, is where you truly see the difference. We're talking about different levels. Okay, so if you struggle with those passages in the TOEFL, then the passages in the GMAT will seem much harder. Okay, so that's one very important thing. So there are two ways we're going to prepare for reading comprehension. One thing is just pure practice, and one thing is basically vocabulary knowledge. Now, in order for you to learn the vocabulary, it's going to take you, as I've said before, a long time. You can't learn thousands of words in a couple of days. That's not possible. Okay, so you better start preparing early on. And then as far as practice, you're going to have to read a lot. Believe me, a lot. Okay, but I'm going to tell you more about this on the introduction. So having mentioned that, right now we're going to start with the introduction, but before that, I'm going to ask you to subscribe to the channel and click on the notification bell, okay, to receive our latest updates. It wouldn't hurt you to also click on the like button if you find this video useful. Now let's go to the introduction. Okay, great. So now we're starting with the third question type for the verbal section, reading comprehension. Okay, this is the third question type we're seeing. We already saw our full lessons for sentence correction and critical reasoning. So this is what a reading passage looks like on the GMAT. Okay, to the left, you're going to get your passage. To the right, you're going to get your questions, right? Usually, per passage, there are going to be three questions. Three questions that are going to be associated with a passage. So this one's the first one. Then you answer that first one, then you're going to get a second one, and then a third one, all for the same passage. Okay, the passage on the left is always going to be there. Okay, so it's not going to change. You're going to be able to read it when you're answering each of the questions. Now, you already know, because you already seen our introduction for the GMAT, our first video of this course. Now, in the GMAT, you can go back. So once you answer this first question, you can go back. You go to the second question, that you cannot return and modify your answer. Okay, so that's something very important. That's different from other exams, such as the TOEFL. Okay, you can go back and modify your answer. So that's it. You have three questions. Sometimes it could be four. Okay, so let's say sometimes it could be four. Okay, especially when the passage is long. Okay, and there is something we have to talk about. Something very important: timing. What is the timing for this question? So actually the GMAT doesn't really give you specific times, but what you have to do is you have to allocate around 3 minutes to read a passage and 1 minute to answer each of the questions to answer. Okay, now if your passage is long, But usually passages are going to be short. But if your passage is long, then you could read for 4 minutes. Okay? 4 minutes you read, and then you answer each of the questions in 1 minute. Okay? Now that's the thing. How do you distinguish between short and long passages? Because this was a short passage. Why? Because everything fits in only one screen. Now, if you happen to see a big scrolling bar here, something that allows you to go down and up and down, right, for several lines, then it means you are facing a long passage, okay? So that you know, long passages are not that common. And that's why most passages are going to be short, and you will have to allocate only 3 minutes to read them. Okay, so that's reading comprehension. You have your passage to the left, you have your question to the right. Once you answer your question, of course, you can go back and modify it. You get 3 minutes to read the whole passage and 1 minute per question. Okay, now that's just the thing. You have to read the passage. Okay, we're gonna get into the fundamentals of reading right now. But yes, I mean, unfortunately, you're gonna have to read. It's not like other exams in which you can hunt for answers. I'm gonna explain that to you right now. So first, let's talk about the topics. All right, topics that get tested here on the GMAT. Now, that's one very big difference with the GRE, for example, right? Maybe you are thinking or you're already preparing for the GRE. Okay, the GRE here, GMAT and GRE. Now, both are exams that are totally valid for MBAs. Okay, the main difference here on the verbal section is that the GRE, as it is directed at several masters, it's not specific for MBAs. They take more on liberal arts, while the GMAT has a more scientific orientation. Okay, and that's very noticeable, especially here on the reading section. Okay, whereas the GRE will ask you more about topics like journalism, like history, right, liberal arts, maybe a little literature. The GMAT is more scientific, and that could be attractive for some people, but it could also be a deterrent. Right, it is often a deterrent because, let's face it, most people who are applying for an MBA, they are not about science, and they shouldn't know science. Right, topics like biology, natural sciences, especially geology, astronomy, paleontology, archaeology. Those are things, those are topics that usually people who are in business, they don't read about too much. Okay, and now for the GMAT, you're going to have to prepare. You're going to have to read those articles of these topics, so you get the vocabulary, so you get some knowledge, and you are not totally lost. Okay, that's something you're going to have to do, especially, yeah, that's true. Several people, a lot of people, right, more than I would like, have trouble with this nature or natural sciences, nature articles. Okay, so that's something we're going to have to pay close attention to. The other topic that is also tested on the GMAT would be social sciences. What are social sciences? Things such as sociology, gender studies, and anthropology, right? This could come across as being a little bit easier than the natural sciences, because most of the time when you are studying business management, economics, maybe not finance, but economics, yes, you are required as part of college, right, to read several articles about these topics. Okay, so you might be acquainted with them. It's not gonna be a shock. Okay, now history is also tested on the GMAT. Economic history, politics, business, and administrative history. So overall history. Okay, that's not too difficult, because if you've done business, if you've majored in economics, most of the time you've had a good, let's say, amount of courses in the liberal arts. So in your first years of college, most likely you've had a good exposure to this kind of topics. So that's not going to be a problem. And there are other types of topics also, like economics, pure economics, not economic history, like in this one. Just pure economics, such as, for example, when they start reviewing fiscal or monetary policies. If you're an economist, that's going to be a very easy reading. Okay. Now, if you're not an economist, you might suffer a little bit because of the technicism, because of the jargon. Now, law, right? A lot of people suffer whenever you have a legal passage, because lawyers have a lot of jargon, they have a lot of technical words. Okay, so you just have to be careful. Fortunately, it's not too common to encounter a law passage or a legal passage. And lastly, business models. For example, the author might be writing about a way to increase business revenue, or a way to increase business some procedure inside the business, logistics kind of thing. Okay, so that's the topic. Those are the topics we're going to see on the GMAT, with a special emphasis on the natural sciences. So from the get-go, from now on, because let's face it again, if you are applying for an MBA, most likely your major is economics, business, finance, etc., and you don't have a good background on science, natural sciences, so you are going to have to read a lot. Okay, now in order for you to read, in order for you to practice, you're going to need more material. Of course, I mean, you probably already bought your official guide, you already have access to your official guide and a lot of official resources, and that's fine. Of course, you already downloaded our free PDF with 100 GMAT, high quality GMAT questions actually, okay, and with video explanations, okay, so download it, and you have a lot of material to practice with, but definitely you are going to need more. So these are some websites in which you are going to find articles that have a level very similar to that of the GMAT, okay, so sciencedaily.com, scientificamerican.com, smithsonianmag.com, mdpi.com, right? Those are, especially those first four, those are the best sites because those are free, okay? Now, for the other ones, you're going to need a subscription, but those are very good too. Bloomberg, The Economist, and the New York Times, of course, all right? So you're going to find a lot of material there for you to practice or for you to read. Don't read just novels. A lot of people just want to increase their English vocabulary with novels. The novels are cool, they're fine, etc. But for the GMAT, you want to be a little bit more specialized. You want to be more scientific oriented. So you're going to have to read those specific topics, especially journals like this ones. Okay, so just from the get-go, start reading. Maybe make it a habit for you to read a couple of articles a day, and you're going to see how your vocabulary, especially in those technical words and those technical verbs, is going to increase dramatically. Okay, but it's something that you're going to have to practice. Practice makes a master. So now we're going to go over some of the fundamentals of reading. Okay, don't skip this part because this, as usual, is the introduction is the most important part. If you don't follow the steps on the introduction, then you are set up for failure. Okay, now the GMAT reading section is different from the TOEFL or the IELTS reading section. Now, if you already watched our free complete course for the TOEFL, here number 1 here on YouTube, you're going to find out that the way you do the reading comprehension section on the TOEFL is like this. First of all, you have a passage, and then you have your question, right? Let's say this question number 1. So you first read the question. Once you read the question, you try to hunt for answers in the passage, but you don't need to read the passage first. Just read the question, then you try to read specific parts of the passage, trying to hunt for answers, okay? That works for the TOEFL, and it also does for the IELTS. Now, it's not gonna work though for the GMAT. The GMAT's got a higher level, okay? A lot of people ask me, how do you compare the TOEFL and the IELTS reading section to that of the GMAT? It's like comparing a kitty to a tiger, okay? Totally different animals. The GMAT's got a much higher level. It's more academic. So the level is going to be higher. It's full of traps. So maybe the author is going to change positions in the middle of the passage, okay? And if you don't read it, you're going to miss it. And if you miss it, you're going to miss a position. You're going to miss the whole purpose of the passage, the whole idea of the passage. And then you're not going to answer good, okay? Your answers are going to be all incorrect, and you're going to get a very low score. You're going to get depressed, and then you're going to quit trying to apply for an MBA, okay? And we don't want that, of course. So just be careful here. The way you do the GMAT is that you first have to read, okay? You have to read the passage. That's why you have those 3 minutes. Of course, 4 minutes if it's a long passage, okay? But 3 minutes usually to read the passage, okay? That's the time that you have to control yourself the time. The GMAT won't stop you. You're gonna have to control yourself, right? But you have 3 minutes on average. Now, in those 3 minutes, you have to be able to read the passage. So you know story, you know the story that passage, you know the main idea, and you know what the passage is about. Okay, so basically after you read for 3 minutes, you should have these 3 things. Number 1, you should be able to tell a short story. So you gotta be able to summarize the whole passage, right? You finish in 3 minutes and you have to be able to summarize this. Imagine that you have, let's say, a little boy or little girl, 10-year-old boy, 10-year-old boy, or 10-year-old girl in front of you, okay? And you have to explain things to him. So you have to tell him or tell her what this passage is about in your own words and with easy words for this kid to understand. Okay, so that's how you do things. If you can't explain the content of the passage, you can summarize it using easy terminology, then it means that you have understood most of the passage. Otherwise, you haven't understood. Okay, and then you are not practicing correctly. So that's the way you do things here. You first have to be able to summarize it in easy words. Now, one very important thing, and a lot of people fail at this point, is that do not expect to get a 100% comprehension in those 3 minutes. Okay, you gotta feel comfortable with only 70%, let's say. If you get a 70% comprehension in those 3 minutes of the whole passage, that's fine. That's good enough. Okay, good enough. 70% is fine. We don't need 100%. Okay, why don't we need 100%? Because this passage is going to be there at all times. So when you're answering, let's say if they ask you for something specific, then you just need to go back to the passage, to that specific part, and read it better. You see? So 70% is good enough. That's the efficient point. Okay, the point of efficiency, the optimization point. Of course, we are here talking about you are a business graduate, right? So it's always about efficiency. We don't need 100. That's too much. As long as it's efficient, then you move on to the next thing. Okay, so once you have a 70% comprehension, that's fine. Then you move on to the next part. Okay, and that's something very important because a lot of people strive for 100. They just wanna get. They only feel comfortable when they have understood the passage completely. But of course, they are not going to be able to do that in under 3 minutes. So they end up spending a lot of time. All right. And remember, time is our main commodity here. It's like currency. It's like money in this exam. Okay. You don't want to waste time. So time is very important. You have to be in control of the time at all times. Okay. So now that's one thing you want. You got to be able to tell the short story when you finish reading this. Now, the other thing you want is that you want to identify the purpose, the content of each of the paragraphs. Now, the thing here is that, let's say our passage contains 3 paragraphs. Most passages are going to have several paragraphs, okay? There are very few that have only one big paragraph. Now, each paragraph, if the author is transitioning from one paragraph to the next, it is because he's going to touch upon some other subtopic. Okay, so each paragraph has its own subtopic. Okay, now for example, it could be that, let's say the author is reviewing a book. In the first paragraph, he answers all the context. He gives you all the context. For example, who, what, where, when, etc. Right, the whole context for you to understand the book. Right. Then in the second paragraph, he's going to mention, for example, some pros about the book, okay, some merits about the book. And then in the third paragraph, he's going to say mention some drawbacks. He's going to throw some criticism, right? Now, the thing is here, you got to be able to know what each paragraph is about. That's very important for you to have the whole structure, to have the whole map on your mind. Okay, so for example, when they ask you about a specific thing, about some benefit, you already know that you have to only look in this second paragraph. You're not gonna scan the whole passage, right? Because that's gonna be a waste of time. Okay, so you have to know where the information is located. That's very important. And number 3, you also want to be able to identify the main purpose of the passage. So by the time you finish reading this passage in under 3 minutes, what you have to do is you have to be able to mention why the author, basically why is the author writing this passage? What drove him or drove her to passage actually here to write this passage? He, of course, that the author here is trying to persuade you of something, and he's trying to convince you of something usually. So that's the main point, the main purpose. We're gonna go more deeply over that concept course later on, okay? But that's very important. That's the most important thing we want. Why is the author, what's the idea of the author? What does he want to achieve with this passage, okay? So those are the 3 things you gotta have by the time you finish reading this in under 3 minutes. Now let's move here. Fundamentals of reading, of course, we have this little acronym, PET, right? For those of you who own a pet, this is going to be very easy to remember, okay? Because we, of course, love our pets, so just remember pets, okay? The first P, pay more attention to the opening lines. Now, of course, we have, let's say, a passage with 3 paragraphs, right? By far, let me change colors here, by far, the most important paragraph, the most important part here is the first one. Why? Because in the first one, they're going to give you the whole context. Now, a reading is like a building, right? Let's say, let me draw a building here, all the windows. Okay, this is a building. Now, if this building, let's say this is a building like that, okay? Now, if this building doesn't have, let's say there's a flag here. Okay, if this building doesn't have a good foundation, then the whole thing is going to crumble, right? It's going to fall. So this foundation for your reading is the first paragraph. So you have to understand it very clearly. Okay, you have to put a lot of effort into grasping what this content is. Okay, because usually they're going to give you the context, who, what, when, why. If that's not clear, then you're going to suffer when you go into the following paragraphs. So you're better off paying close attention here. If that involves spending a little bit more time, then that's fine, okay? As long as it's just a little bit, not too much, but a little more, okay? Now, the same is true for the first sentences in each paragraph, okay? The first sentence in each paragraph is the most important, because remember, when the author is transitioning from one paragraph, let's say paragraph number 1 to paragraph number 2, it is because he's going to talk about a different subtopic. So in the first sentence, he's going to introduce that subtopic, and you want to get a good grasp of what that change has been, okay? So what that subtopic is. So you want to pay more attention to the first lines of each paragraph. So pay more attention to the opening lines. Number 2, emphasis on keywords. Okay, this is important. Now, this is the 4th video of our whole GMAT course, okay? That means you've already watched our introduction for the GMAT. You've already watched our sentence correction complete course, and you've already watched our critical reasoning complete course also, right? So now we're doing reading comprehension. And why is that important for you to go in order? Because if you've watched our sentence correction course, you already know your theory about subordinators and about coordinators, okay? That's going to help you a lot when you read, okay? Because usually keywords are going to be subordinators and coordinators. In case you haven't watched our sentence correction course, then I'll leave a link here. Just go and watch it first. It will help you to know sentence correction before you do reading, okay? Now, for example, let's say we have a contrast keyword. Contrast keywords such as, for example, however, nevertheless, but, those kind of things, okay? Now, let's say the author, let's say you only have 2 paragraphs, and the author is reviewing a book, okay? Now, let's say the author in the first paragraph is praising the book. He praises the book, okay? So apparently, it looks like the author has written this whole passage in order to praise a book. But then at the end, in the second paragraph, he says, however, this book has several flaws. So he starts criticizing, attacking the book. Let's say attacking. Yeah. So of course, if we miss this contrast keyword, we might miss that change in position. Okay. So that's a big thing, because you always want to know the position of the author, because if you don't have the position clear, then you won't know what the main point or the main purpose of the passage is. Is that okay? So again, the position of the author must be clear at all times, and in order for you to follow that position cleanly, you have to account. You have to be able to identify these words, these contrast keywords, okay? If you miss one of those keywords, then chances are you're going to miss the whole purpose, the whole posture of the author, and that's not going to be good, okay? So that's one type of keyword, but you might find other types of keywords. For example, you might have a resolution keyword, such as therefore, thus, hence, consequently, etc. Those kind of things. Okay, they give you kind of results, right? Resolution or result. So, for example, let's say we are reading a paragraph with a lot of technical words. This paragraph is too difficult for you, so you read it and you don't understand it. Okay, too many technical words. But at the end, you see that the author says, therefore, blah, 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 blah. So what you say is this: okay, this is too difficult for me, but I don't want to lose the whole passage, so I still want to get a little bit of information from this part. So I'm going to put all my effort into understanding this last part, the therefore part, because we know that when we see this resolution, these result keywords, they are giving us what? Like a summary of the whole paragraph, right? So if you understand this last sentence, you're going to understand the summary of the whole passage, of the whole paragraph. I'm sorry. You might not understand the details. Okay, that's fine. They are not that necessary, but you will be able to get the main essence of that paragraph. So those result keywords, those resolution keywords, those are lifesavers. So that's the importance of understanding and identifying keywords. Number 3, take notes. Okay, we're gonna have a whole chapter in this video about taking notes, right? Note taking. But just let me tell you something in advance. Taking notes is crucial for most people. Okay, in my experience, I've taught CEOs of big companies all over the world. Okay, and everybody thinks they have a great memory, but once you read, especially long passages, people usually don't remember that much information. So if you want to really improve your memory when you're reading a passage, if you want to power up your understanding, your comprehension of a reading passage, then you need to take notes. Okay, and you have to learn how to take notes, because at the beginning, if you're not used to taking notes, it's gonna seem like it's gonna damage you more than help you. It's gonna seem that it's gonna slow you down. Okay, and yes, at the beginning it will slow you down, but once you start being efficient, you start becoming efficient at taking notes, it's gonna help you out a lot. Okay, but the important thing is that if you encounter a long passage and you don't know how to take notes, most of the time students do very poorly without notes. Okay, so you better just start practicing note taking. We have a full chapter on that. And then at the end, scheme. Okay, scheme. And scheme means, of course, to scan, right? To go quickly and just don't focus on all the information. You have to be able to discriminate information. There is information that is important, and there is information that is just fluff. Okay, fluff. So here, sentence correction comes in handy. Okay, because in sentence correction you are taught what makes, or what's the main component, for example, of a sentence, right? You know that the subject and the verb is always important. So if you have a sentence, you have to get the subject and the verb, the main subject and the main verb right away, right? That's an important part of every sentence. That's the first thing you look for. You should be focused on that. And then, of course, you know modifiers. Some modifiers might be important, some others might be just fluff. So you have to be able to identify when you're in front of a modifier. Usually, for example, prepositional phrases, right? Those are going to be fluff, right? Relative clauses will give you very specific information. So the first time you read this, usually it's like fluff, because we don't care too much about that, because they are so specific that we'll read them when they ask us something about it. If they don't ask us about it, then we don't need to read it. Okay? Now, for example, whereas now on the other hand, you might have subordinators, and most subordinators are very important. Okay, so use your sentence correction theory. Of course, you should already watch our sentence correction course, our sentence correction lesson here, and apply that in order for you to discriminate information and to know which information matters and which one doesn't. Okay, so we've gone over the principles, the fundamentals of reading. Okay, you have to pay close attention to that. You have to read that way, okay, because these theory has been developed after evaluating after our experience with thousands of students. Okay, and yes, you have to apply it. A lot of people just want to rush. They don't want to follow a system, and I understand that. But you will be better off following a system. You'll be better off following steps. Okay, if not, you're gonna be totally unorganized, and then you're going to quit. That's what happens quite often. So now we're gonna go to chapter number 2. In this chapter, we're gonna talk about the components of a passage. Perfect. Now we're gonna start with chapter number 2, the main idea. We've already talked a little bit about the main idea. We've mentioned that the main idea is the most important part of the passage. Basically, that's the reason why the author is writing the passage. All right, he wants to persuade you of something. Okay, now we're gonna go over the components of a passage. Okay, what things are gonna make up our reading passage? So all reading passages on the GMAT have the following components. Number 1, the context, where the author will introduce the characters, right? Think of it as in the movie, right? When you have a movie, you first have to have some context in order to get to know who the characters are, in order for you to know what the theme or the topic is about. What do they want, right? What are they looking for? And also the whole context, especially the place and the time. Okay, so that's the context. Now, number 2 is supporting evidence. In the supporting evidence, the author will either quote or will be giving his own opinion. So that's very important for us to notice, because if we analyze the supporting evidence, we're going to get to know if the author likes or dislikes something, if he's in favor of something or if he's against something. Okay, and then number 3, the main idea. Okay, which is the most important part. And in this lesson, you are going to learn how to identify the main idea, which is one of the questions most of the time that you'll get on reading comprehension. Okay, so reading passages will also have the following component or section. Foreshadowing. The foreshadowing is something that not all reading passages have, but when you see foreshadowing, that's going to be very useful. Okay, it's going to make our job much easier. I'll show you why in a minute. Now we go over here, the components of a passage, the context. Okay, so what is the context about? Number 1, found mostly at the beginning of a passage. That's why we've already gone over paying very close attention and even more attention to the first paragraph. Usually in the first paragraph, they're going to give you the context. Okay, context involves the main characters, right? Like in the movie or like in a book, characters. It also involves the time, the place, okay? And it answers several questions: who, what, when, where. And the topic will be part of the context. Now the topic usually will be the what, right? The what. What is the author doing? Is he, let's say he's reviewing a book, right? That book, that's your topic. That's what the passage is discussing. Okay, maybe the author is criticizing a study, all right? So what is the topic? The study. Because that's what's getting criticized by the author in that whole passage, that the author is writing the passage to criticize the study. So the study is the main thing, the topic, okay? Then, for example, the author is trying to peddle, to sell you an idea, for example, a new method. So that's the topic, the new method the author will be selling to you, will be trying to convince you of. Okay, so that's the what, and that what usually will be found early on in the passage, right? Because the author has to set the topic usually from the start, and you need to be able to identify it. Okay, now we're gonna go over some examples here. Okay, some examples. So, for example, the first one, it's one sentence. Starting in 1970, many factories in the US decided to implement automatization procedures. Okay, so that sentence is giving us a lot of context. It's telling us about the time, right, when, 1970s, from 1970s onwards, who factories in the US, so also giving us the who here, factories, and giving us the location, right, the place. Where, right? Where? In the US. And here's what. What did they decide to do? They decided to to implement some automatization procedures. Okay, so that sentence is giving us a lot of context. That's a sentence that most likely we will find early on in the passage, in the first paragraph. Okay, so that's how the context is going to be given. Now let's go to the second one. Farmers in France have fought the recent legislation that requires environmental certification to operate. Again, who? Farmers, right? Where? In France. What have they done? They have fought. What have they done? They have fought. They have fought what? Legislation. So that's the main action, right? So that's unfolding already. It's unfolding as in a movie, right? So you can imagine, you can picture in your mind these farmers fighting a certain law that gives them some problems. Okay, so that's how you get the context. So let's go here to the next component. The next component will be the supporting evidence. Okay, what is the supporting evidence? Part of a passage in which the author gives an opinion or quotes an opinion. So he gives an opinion of his own, or he quotes an opinion or indicates the pros and cons of a situation. So basically they're judging. When the author starts judging or quoting a judgment, that's supporting evidence. Okay, so the author might say, I like it, I don't like it, I think it is good, I think it is horrible. Okay, so that's giving his opinion. Or the author might be saying, some scholars believe that this is bad, or some scholars believe that this is good. So in that case, he'll be quoting an opinion. So the opinion doesn't belong to him or to her, but he or she will be quoting somebody else who has an opinion. Okay, it's very important for us to notice when the author is talking by himself or herself, or for himself and for herself, and when the author is quoting. Okay, talking for themselves, and then you have when the author is quoting somebody else. Okay, that's going to be very important, because when the author is talking for himself, then the author will not be neutral. He will be either in favor of something or against. Now when the author is quoting, he will be neutral, most likely. Okay, that's going to make a big difference when you are trying to identify the main purpose. Okay, but now the supporting evidence. So the author will give an opinion, quote an opinion, or show the pros and cons of a situation. The author might be a little bit more neutral and say, okay, we have a book. Good parts about the book are this, right? Those are the benefits, the merits. And then the bad parts about the book, the drawbacks, the failures, the flaws are this. So the author will be kind of neutral, just trying to evaluate or analyze the book. He's not trying to convince you that the book is good. Neither he is trying to convince you that the book is bad. He's just trying to evaluate, okay, very neutrally. Now, in some cases, it might directly support the author's main idea. Of course, it might support the author's main idea, because if the author is giving his own opinion, then that will work in favor of whatever he wants to convince you of. Okay, some examples here. Such works would enable students taking Asian American Studies courses to look up basic information on Asian American individuals. Now, this is not only context. I mean, most likely it contains context also, but it does give you some judgment, some judging, right? It does give you some opinions. Would enable students. This would enable is that the author is, that's not data, right? We've already went over this in critical reasoning, right? That's not data. That would enable would be something hypothetical. The author is expecting that to happen, but it doesn't necessarily have to happen, okay? To look at basic information, so that shows that the author is saying these books will be beneficial. This works here, right? The works will be beneficial. That's his opinion. It's not necessarily true, but that's what he thinks. And partly he wants to convince you of that. Number 2 here, Doberger's work set an early standard for the sensitive analysis of women's electoral activities. Okay. It set an early standard for analysis. Now, is that a fact? Is that a fact that a work can set a standard? That doesn't look like a fact. It looks more like the opinion of the author, right? How do we know this work was the quintessential work at that time? The author believes so. So that's an opinion, and that's just supporting evidence. The author is trying to support whatever he wants to say about this book. Maybe that book is historical, that book is a classic, right? So he's saying this book set up an early standard. But that doesn't necessarily have to be so, and that cannot be confirmed. Because what is a standard and what is not is difficult to pin down. It's difficult to confirm, okay? So those are examples of supporting evidence. And it's important for you to notice, to be able to identify the supporting evidence, because that's what the main idea or main purpose is going to require, okay? Now let's go to see the main idea. This main idea is the most important part of a passage. Remember, we mentioned we have usually three questions per passage. Most likely one of the questions is going to ask you directly for the main idea. Okay, one of those questions will always ask you, not always, but let's say 90% of the time. One of those questions will ask you directly about the main idea, and that happens to be also the easiest question. So if you already watched our video, our introductory video for the GMAT, you know that if you want a decent score in the GMAT, let's say 600 and above, decent, I'm not talking about a high score, I'm talking about a decent score, you don't want to fail, or you don't want to get too many easy questions incorrect. Because if that happens, then you're going to get a very low score. Okay, so the key on the GMAT is to be able to answer all easy questions correct. Okay, and the main idea is something you should not fail. Okay, you shouldn't fail on the main idea. Now, what is the main idea? We already said that the main idea is the reason why the author is writing this passage, right? What's the purpose of him or her writing this passage? The most important part of a passage. It's the reason for the author to write a passage. Okay, so that's the main idea. Now, the main idea is made of two things: a position and the topic. Okay, the position will be how the author feels about this. Is he neutral? Is he for something positive, or is he against something? So, is he trying to attack something? Is he trying to criticize? That would be negative, right? Or is he trying to, for example, to peddle something, to sell something, to persuade you of something, to recommend, to suggest something? That would be positive. Or is he just trying to evaluate? Is he just trying to discuss about something? Is he trying to narrate? That would be neutral, okay? So that's very important for us to notice. And of course, we should have gotten already the position from evaluating the supporting evidence, right? The supporting evidence, we get to know how the author feels about a certain topic. Okay, now it's going to be a verb, so that's why most of these main ideas, main purposes, are always going to start with a verb. For example, a main idea would be the author is trying to criticize a work. Of course, they're going to give you a little bit more details, but basically that's how it's. That the format of a main idea, right? He's trying to criticize, or the author is trying to evaluate a new method to control a plague, something like that. Okay, so we will always start with a verb, and that verb will denote the position. Okay, and then next we have the topic. The topic is usually the what from the context, the object of the passage. In this case, the first example I gave, criticize a work, the work is a topic. So think of it as the main star of the movie, right? What is the author trying to do? The passage is about a work and he's trying to criticize it. Okay. The second one, evaluate a new method to control plague, a plague, that's our topic. Okay, so that's how we do things. So, for example, the author might be trying to criticize a new work. So in this case, to criticize is a negative. but that showcases, that denotes the position. Okay, so we always start with a verb. Another example of a main idea would be the author is trying to evaluate a new method. They're going to give you a little bit more detail. For example, a new method to control pests, something like that. Okay, but the position will be showcased by a verb, and that verb in turn will be either positive, neutral, or negative, and we should have already gotten that from the supporting evidence. Okay, now on the other hand, we have the topic. Okay, what is the topic? The topic is like the main actor, the main star of the movie, the object of the passage. We already mentioned that the topic will be identified from the context as the what, right? So the topic in this case, in my first example, would be a new book, right? The new book is the main thing, is what the author is discussing in the passage, and the author is trying to criticize it. But the new work is the main topic. Okay, the object. Then in the second example would be a new method to control pests. That's the main thing about the passage. That's the object. That's what the author is discussing. That's what the author is talking about. And then he tries to do something to that object. Okay, so that's how you get your main idea. This is very important for you to master. You have to dominate this if you wanna get a decent score on the GMAT. Okay, let's say if you're already studying for the GMAT, if you're already preparing, and you notice that your score is very low, most likely you don't have this down. Okay, because reading comprehension is essential. Okay, I'm going to talk more about that later, but this is the easiest question you're going to get in reading comprehension, and you have to get it right. There is no other way. Okay, you have to be a master at answering these main ideas. And then remember, we also mentioned that we have one additional optional component. Some passages will have them, and some other passages won't. Right, which is the foreshadowing. For those of you who are into movies, you like watching movies, you already know what a foreshadowing is, right? Foreshadowing is when you start a movie and they give you a scene, that, for example, the character is already dying, right? And then that lets you know what's going to come next, because then the movie starts, the actual movie chronologically, and the character is just alive, right? So they show you a scene of what's coming next. That's a foreshadowing. And the same thing happens here with the passages. Some of these passages will open up with a very useful foreshadowing, usually on the first paragraph. Okay, so for example, if the author opens up with a problem, the author mentions a problem. There is a problem that people have been trying to solve, blah, blah, blah. We already know something. That's a foreshadowing, because if the author is talking about a problem, it is because later on he's going to try to give us a solution. All right, he might be trying to give us a solution, or he might be trying to quote in somebody who has a solution, or just discussing about a solution. All right, but something to do with a solution for that problem, and that solution will be the topic, the what. You see? So by being aware that the problem leads us to a solution, we'll find our topic much easier. Now, if the author opens up with a question, right? For example, he says, people don't know how cells work. Or that's a question. And then later he's going to give us an answer, right? How cells work. So in that case, the answer is the topic. Okay? If the author opens up with an observation, for example, it might be that in a study, it was observed that men smoke more than women. All right, so it's an observation. And then the author is going to try to give us, or he's going to discuss about an explanation. Okay, why that happens. Why is that so? And if the author starts with an old idea, for example, thousands of years ago, people believed that ghosts existed. Then he's going to come up with a new idea. Okay, if he mentions something that people no longer believe and that is old, it is because the author is going to give us a new idea about that same concept. Okay, so this foreshadowing is very useful, because once you identify it, you know what's coming next. A problem is tied to a solution, a question is linked to an answer, an observation is linked to an explanation, and an old idea will be totally tied to a new idea. Okay, so that's how things work. Okay, there is some theory. Okay, so reading comprehension, there is some theory behind it. Okay, it's not only to read and just try to get the answer. You have to be able to notice, to identify these parts in your passage. So now what we're going to do is we're going to go and try to do this drill. Here we have a very small passage, very condensed passage. What you will have to do is 3 things. Number 1, identify the context. Where are they giving you the context? Which sentences contain the context? Number 2, identify the supporting evidence. Which sentences are giving you that supporting evidence? And number 3, identify the main idea, right? Main idea. Of course, the main idea, you will have to get the topic and the position, right? Position plus topic. What is the author trying to do here? Okay, of course, there's no right or wrong answer with the main idea. Actually, there could be several. So that's what you need to get. The main idea, of course, it's a little subjective, right? Because the author could be doing several things, but you have to be oriented towards what the author is trying to do. Okay, so I'll give you 3 minutes. Okay, that's a lot of time because this is a very short passage, but I'll give you 3 minutes to read the passage and get this. Okay, so you already finished reading, and here's your context. Okay, this first sentence has the context. Reviving the practice of using elements of popular music in classical composition, an approach that had been in hibernation in the United States during the 60s, composer Philip Glass embraced the ethos of popular music in his compositions, glass-based two symphonies of music by rock musicians David Bowie and Brian Eno. Okay, so 2 sentences. And why are these sentences giving you the context? Number 1, let me change colors here. Number 1, because they are giving me the main character here, Philip Glass. So that's a who. Okay, who? Philip Glass. Then they're also giving me what he did. He embraced the ethos of popular music in his composition. So what is he doing? This guy, Philip Glass, is mixing, right? He's trying to do like a fusion between popular music and classical music. Okay, so that's kind of the action. Okay, and they tell you that it's in the US, right? It happens in the US, and they tell you that it's later than the 60s because it was in hibernation until the 60s. I'm sorry, because it was in hibernation since the 60s, so the 60s were before, and now they have been revived, right? Revived. So it's later than the 60s, all right? So it's been revived now. So that's what we have. So that's the context. We know that this guy is trying to use or fuse modern music with classical music, and this happens later than the 60s in the United States. Now, what's the supporting evidence? Here we have it. Okay, why? Why is it supporting evidence? Because here we can tell the author's position. All right, he gives us some opinions, but the symphony's sound is distinctively his. All right, the sound is his. Is that something you can corroborate? Is it something you can prove? No. I mean, that's the author listened to it and he thought that that sound was his. So that's already something that it's an opinion. Okay. Popular elements do not appear out of place. Do not appear out of place. According to whom? According to the author. So the author liked this. He liked this fusion. Okay. So that's again, he's giving us opinion here. Shares certain harmonies and rhythms of rock music. Yet, this use of popular elements has not made Glass a composer of popular music. So he believes, the author believes that by fusing these two elements, it doesn't make this composer a popular composer, a popular musician. Okay, his music is not a version of popular music packaged to attract classical listeners. So that's also an opinion, right? Opinion. I'm saying this fusion stays within the classical confinement, within the classical area, right? It doesn't translate into the popular area. It's not, the genre is classical, fused classical, but not popular, something like that. That's what the author is trying to say, okay? But that's something that cannot be proved. That's the author's interpretation of music, okay? So that's why we're saying that this is the supporting evidence, and definitely the author is trying to do something. The author is trying to show something, and that's the main idea. So what could the main idea be like? Because there are several ways we could phrase the main idea, but one of the ways, a very accurate way to phrase it, would be this. Support that an innovative work from a composer maintains its classical essence. Something like that. So here we have our positive position, right? Position. In this case, it's positive. Right, support. So he wants to give his opinion, and his opinion happens to be positive towards the work of this composer. So support. What does he want to support? The object. He wants to support the composition, actually the fusion, this experiment this Philip Glass has made. That innovative work, so that's my object, the innovative work, which is the fusion of music, right, classical and popular. Maintain, and he wants to support what about the work? That it keeps its essence. Okay, something like that. Okay, but of course the two main things here are the position and the object. All right, the object. So those are the two main things. Of course, this whole thing here is details. It could be phrased, it could be rephrased in several different ways. Okay, but something like that. That's what we should expect as an answer, something similar to this. Okay, so now you know what you should have after you read your passage, okay? What information you should be able to tell after you have read the passage. If you are not able to do that, then it means that you're not ready for the GMAT, and you have to put more effort. You have to practice more, okay? You have to practice way more, and as we've mentioned before, you have to practice with those websites I gave you before, okay? But you have to practice every day, maybe 3, 4, 5 articles. There's no limit, okay? The sky is the limit for you. Okay, but you have to practice. If you don't practice, let's say if you just do 1 article a day, maybe it's going to take you a couple years, okay? Being honest, okay? Because your ability to read, as I've mentioned earlier, will develop over time, okay? So this is what takes the longest for you to improve. So if you want to accelerate your ability to read, then you have to practice like crazy. Now, before we go to the next chapter, chapter 3, I want to tell you a big secret. This is a video I made a while ago about translations, okay? How translating can help you improve your grammar and your vocabulary. Now, I've seen this with tons of students and I use it here with my students at Liberty. And of course, just go watch the video because that's, in my opinion, the fastest route, the fastest way that you have in order to improve vocabulary. Maybe it's going to take you a couple months, but it's much faster than just reading. Okay, it's because when you translate to your own language, then you are going to be forced. You're going to be forced to understand each and every word. So just click here and watch our video for translations. Now we're going to go to chapter number 3 and we're going to talk about a very important topic. Okay, a lot of people don't like this. I understand. Note-taking. Note-taking is essential and I'm going to tell you why. Okay, so now we're starting chapter number 3. Note-taking. And we mentioned this before, it's very important. One of the fundamentals of reading is that you take notes. Okay, this is essential, especially for longer passages. But I think that it always helps. Now, the importance of note-taking, most people will associate note-taking to memory, right? Because of course it fosters the comprehension. It creates a picture on your mind, right? So, for example, when you're reading, you are imagining all these concepts that are on the reading, but then you don't have any place to land them. So if you want to land those concepts on something tangible, like a piece of paper, that's going to improve your memory is going to remember it more because it's like a double exercise, right? The first thing you imagine them, the second thing you write them down. So you are going over those concepts twice and therefore your memory will power up. You will remember more of the passage. You will remember more of the story. Okay, that's an instantaneous benefit from note-taking, but that's not the only benefit. We also have 2 other benefits that are very important. Number 2, structure, right? Imagine this building here. There's a building, okay? What would happen if the foundation here was weak? Weak foundation. What would happen? This whole thing would fall down, crumble, right? We just fall down. So in this sense, you must have a good foundation. In order for you to have good foundation, you are going to use notes, right? Notes to crack the beginning of the passage, because these notes are going to help you understand the passage better. And also because you want to see, as we mentioned before, what each paragraph is talking about, right? What's the subtopic of each of the paragraphs? In order to do that, you better start taking notes, because otherwise, once you finish, let's say if you didn't take notes, right? You finish reading the passage and they ask you for a specific part, for example, where are the consequences of something the author talked about? Then you're going to need to scan the whole passage in order to remember where the consequences were. But if you have notes, if you took notes, then you have, for example, passage number 2 is about the consequences, passage number 3 is about the aftermath, which is very similar, but a little different. Passage number 1 is about the problem, something like that, you see? So in your notes, you can neatly have the whole structure. It's like the skeleton of the whole passage. So that's going to help you when they ask you something specific, because you are going to know where things are located at. Okay, that's the idea. You know where everything is located at. And in my opinion, the most important benefit from note-taking, that note-taking is like a reality check. Okay, it's a reality check. It will make you be real. What do I mean with this? Is that a lot of people have this problem. They start reading a passage. They take 3 minutes or more, which is the allocated time. And once they finish, they notice, they just realize they haven't understood anything. Okay, so if you ask them, what is this passage about? They say, oh, it was so hard. I don't understand what it's about. That just means that they are not reading correctly. They are making huge mistakes when they read. So if you take notes, the important thing is, let's say you're going to take notes for the first paragraph or the first couple sentences. Okay? Then in order for you to take notes down, you have to understand whatever was mentioned here. Because if you don't understand, then there's no way you can take notes. Okay? So by taking notes, you're forcing yourself to truly understand what you're reading. So maybe you read one sentence, you want to take notes, then you realize you don't understand the sentence, then you go and read it again. Okay? You don't have to wait to read all the sentences, the whole passage, and then at the end, just at the end, notice that you don't understand anything. Okay? So that allows you to fix errors, to fix mistakes very quickly. That's why it's a reality check. When you take notes, you have to understand whatever you are taking notes of. Okay, so you're going to take a little bit more time maybe to crack those parts, to be able to grasp the essence of those sentences. But it's going to help you, at least whatever you read, you're going to understand. Okay, that's the thing. So it keeps you in check. And that's a very important benefit from note taking. So now, what's the system we are going to apply for note taking? Efficient note taking. Number one, it focuses more on the beginning. Of course, because we already mentioned that beginning, the first paragraph contains the most important information, right? Especially the context. So, of course, when you take notes, you're going to take more notes of the beginning of the passage. Okay. Now, number two, it focuses on trigger words. Right? What are trigger words? What are these trigger words? Is usually, you could say, subjects, verbs, and things that answer nouns that answer things such as, for example, where, when, right? Those context keywords, how, right? Those kind of context keywords. So, for example, if I'm going to show you some examples now, you just have to take notes of the noun. For example, if they told you, Donald gave a book to Mickey, right? Donald gave a book to Mickey. Okay, I'm not going to write the whole thing down. I'm just going to say Donald, something like an arrow, okay? Because number three, use standardized graphs like arrows and abbreviations. So Donald gave a book to Mickey, right? Maybe I say book here, right? So that's something like abbreviation. Okay, now I could do something even better. I just can say book Mickey, something like that. So I already know because part of it I remember. Now once the word book, which I think is the most important word in here, that book triggers the whole memory. So by mentioning book, say, oh, okay, what happened with the book? And my memory operates, my memory starts working and says, all right, yeah, that book was given to Mickey. Okay, so the trigger word here for this sentence would be book, because by mentioning the book, I remember what happened, what situation went on with the book. Okay, so that's the trick, to write down nouns that will elicit, that will wake up your memory. Okay, it's like you have your memory, it's like there are some drawers, right? And you are opening up the drawer in order to look for that information that you already know, all right? But you might not remember at that time. The notes will make you remember. Okay, so three things. You focus more in the beginning. You focus on trigger words, and then you use graphs, standardized graphs. By standardized, we mean that you have to have your own abbreviations and your own graphs. For example, whenever they say that something is increasing, I will draw an arrow up. Okay. Whenever they say that something is contrast, I will write H, which stands for however. In my case, you can pick your own contrast keyword. Okay. But in my case, whenever I see a contrast, no matter what keyword they use in the passage, I will write an H with a square frame. Okay. Whenever they have a result, I will write T from therefore, right? But you can create your own standard graphs. By standardized, we mean that once you start using one type of graph in order to denote a certain meaning, you keep on using it. Okay, you don't have to change it. Okay, that's the thing. And for example, for other ones, I'll write a result, right? I'll write no. Before, I'll write BF. My best friend for me is before, not after. I write AF. always. Okay, so those are keywords, those are abbreviations that I will always use, and you have to create your own. You can copy mine too if you want, but the thing is that you better start using them at all times, because the more you use them, the more natural they come. Okay, now we're going to do this example. Let's read this together. In recent years, teachers of introductory courses in Asian American Studies have been facing a dilemma non-existent a few decades ago, when hardly any texts in that field were available. So, first thing I'm going to write is now. In recent years, to me, it's the same thing as saying now, right? So, recent, now. Teachers of, so teacher, because teacher is a noun, teacher of in Latin American, Asian American Studies. I don't care about that, because I remember they are talking about Asian American Studies, all right? But it's a teacher of something. They have a dilemma non-existent a few decades ago. So they have a new dilemma. Or I abbreviate the word dilemma a little bit. New, why? Because they say it was non-existent a few decades ago, so it's new. Okay? And what's the dilemma about? The dilemma is about when hardly any texts in that field were available. So before there were no texts. So before no texts. That's it. Those would be my notes for that part. And I can just, once I finish the passage, I can kind of extract all the information from this sentence just by reading notes. Now the teachers have a new dilemma. And the dilemma was that before there were no texts, and I'm imagining just by complement that now there are too many texts. This is the opposite, okay? So that's the thing. That's how you take notes. Let's do a couple more exercises. Okay, so I want you to do here, I want you to take notes. I'm going to give you, let's say, a couple minutes. 1 minute, I think is good enough, all right? 1 minute to do this, okay? And after that, I'm going to show you my notes. Alright, so let's read this. Doverger's work set an early standard for the sensitive analysis of women's electoral activities. Moreover, to Doverger's credit, he placed his findings in the context of many of the historical processes that had shaped these activities. Okay, Doverger's work set a standard, because the word standard is a noun, is a trigger word, for the analysis of women electoral. Moreover, plus, to his credit, he placed his findings. So check for me is something good. All right, check. In the context of many of historical processes that shape findings, historical context. That's my notes for that part. Okay. So this Doverger, which I suppose is the main character of that reading, he set the standard for women electoral activities or something like that. Furthermore, he also did something good, which is that he used historical context in order to do his studies of women electoral activities. Something like that. Just by looking at those notes, I understand what I'm talking about. You see, and I can get the whole thing. Okay. Now we're going to do the same thing for number 3. You get 1 minute and come up with your own notes. Okay, so here is a however, statistical analysis revealed that demographic changes in the workforce did not correlate with variations in the total number of temporary workers. Instead, this analysis suggests that factors affecting employers account for the rise in temporary employment. Okay, let's start with a however, contrast. That's very important because that's a keyword, okay? Contrast. Analysis revealed that demographic changes in the workforce did not correlate with variations. So statistics say something. What do they reveal? That no correlation between changes in workforce, did not correlate with number of temporary employment. Instead, actually, to me using a with a keyword actually, right? This analysis suggests that factors affecting employers account for the rise in temporary employment. So the cause is employers, something that has to do with employers, right? So that's my notes for this part. They say, however, the statistics show that the change in the workforce is not related, it doesn't have a correlation with the number of temporary employment. Okay, actually, the real cause is something to do with employer. It doesn't have to do with the change in workforce. Okay, so that's the thing. That's how I get my notes, and of course I'm able, by the time I finish the passage, if they ask me something, I could even extract information in order to answer a question from my notes. You see, so that's how we do notes. Of course, we're gonna have to practice a lot. Okay, practice makes the master. You keep on practicing, right? I don't want to see you fooling around. I want to see you practicing. But once you get the system, and of course, as I've explained before, in the beginning, you're gonna feel like these notes are going to make you slower. Okay, and that's gonna be true until you get more efficient. Okay, until you get more efficient at note taking, and then these notes are going to help you out a lot. Okay, but you have to practice it for some time. So now we're going to do some drills. Okay, drills for note taking. So we're going to read this for 2 minutes, and you come up with your own notes. Let's go. Okay, so now we're going to, until the last decade, it was believed that sleep was independent of most metabolic processes occurring in the body. Okay, before, I don't need to be exact with until the last decade, just before, people believed that sleep was not correlated with what? With metabolic processes of the body. Okay, so that's the first sentence. It In recent studies, however, we have discovered that the production and release of neurotransmitters such as serotonin depend directly on the food process by the digestive system. Okay, so however, now we have discovered what? Neurotransmitter, example serotonin, depend on food. That's it. Alright, so I can get my own all the information from here. Before, they believed that sleep was not correlated with the metabolic processes of the body. However, now they know that neurotransmitters, for example serotonin, depend on food. So that's the thing. Okay, that's enough for me to get the main idea of the passage, what the story is about. I don't need to go too much into details. Now let's go to the second drill. Here again, you have 2 minutes. Come up. I truly want you to come up with neat notes. Let's go. Okay, so now there's 2 books published in 2005 showcase contrasting approaches to writing the history of Latinos in the US. So that, to me, it sounds like the object, right? So 2 books on Latinos. One is Herm's biography of Josh Escobar, makes hardly any effort to place his history in the context of modern civil rights development. Okay, so one of them is Herm, makes hardly any effort, right? So that's bad. So bad is like bad. And modern civil rights. So the context of no civil rights, no modern. Now number 2 is Levinson. Okay, Levinson. On the other hand, attempts not only to write. On the other hand means good. Not only to write the entire history of Latino immigrants in New York City, but also implements over a decade of civil rights debate. So history, debate, civil rights, and debate on rights overall. Okay, so that's enough for me. This one would be a paragraph, and this would be my notes, right? 2 books on Latinos. The first one is Herm. It's bad for the author. The author criticizes it because it doesn't include modern civil rights. It doesn't include the study of civil rights and how it relates to his topic, right? And then Levinson, or Levin, I wrote. It's good because it contains history of Latinos, and it also contains a debate as far as the civil rights. It includes the civil rights into the whole study. So that's the thing. Okay, that's what I get from this passage, and what I'm getting right now is good enough in order to start answering questions. Okay, here we have drill number 3. All right, we're going to stop for 2 minutes, and then you're going to come up with your notes. Okay, so try to implement all your abbreviations and all your standardized graphs. So here we go, 3, 2, 1, let's go. Alright, so modern sociological studies of refugees, attempting to validate refugees' own stories and experience, have encouraged sociologists to prefer refugees' oral narratives and as a standard source of information, next to the use of other sources such as written autobiographies and anthologies, that brings sociologists face to face with the reality of refugee lifestyle. That's a long sentence. Okay, so now modern studies. Encourage sociologists to prefer oral narrative. Okay, so that's the main thing. Sociologists should prefer oral, next to the use of others such as alright, because that's why closest to reality. Okay, of the lifestyle, of course, of refugees. We're here talking about refugee. Okay, so well, that's my first sentence. According to this new trend, those oral narratives, in contrast to most other standard histories, represent experience from the perspective of refugee, emphasizing refugee, individual, and collective. So here, benefits of oral, because when they say to this new trend, what is the new trend? To read or to consider these oral narratives as the best source of info. So these will be my notes. All right, they're a little hard to read, but I'm going to go over them with you. Modern studies of refugees, they are indicating something, that sociologists should prefer oral narratives to other forms of source of information, right? Why? Because it is the closest you get to reality. So as if these oral narratives were more realistic than other sources. And then this passage also gives you some benefits regarding these oral narratives. So it shows you why these oral narratives, according to, of course, these modern studies of refugees, are more realistic. Okay, that's all I need to get from this part of the passage. Probably that's going to be an introductory paragraph of a longer passage, okay? But that's how you take notes, okay? That's very important. Now, if you don't want to say why, you can just go with question mark. That's good enough. Okay, but you do something there. You can get creative here, just coming up with your own standard graphs. Okay, but the thing is, you need to abbreviate and you need to just write enough so that your memory, when you read this, your memory is triggered. Basically, that's what you need. Okay, so I hope you enjoy this. So again, taking notes is essential. Okay, it helps you be organized. It puts you on check. Okay, that's the thing with taking notes. Now, if let's say for a lot of people who have a very good memory, and there are some people like that, you don't need to take notes when you are dealing with short passages. Okay, you could do well without taking notes for short passages, but believe me, from what I've seen, and again, I've taught students all over the world, from all 5 different continents, students who are very smart also, and I haven't seen anybody really do well. Maybe a couple people, all right, but not almost nobody with long passages. So when you have a long passage, you have to take notes. If you don't take notes, then your performance is going to decrease dramatically, and you don't want that. Okay, so just take notes. And now we're going to chapter number 4, and we're going to start answering questions. Perfect. So now we have chapter number 4, question types. Okay, so now there are 4 main types of question types. The first one is going to be the main idea. We already have discussed this. We know what the main idea is about. We know how we get it. We know that the main idea is made of the position and the topic, 2 components, right? Now, we've also mentioned that it's the easiest question in the batch. We already know that when you have a reading, say this is my reading, you get 3 questions per reading, right? It could be 4, but most of the time it's going to be 3. And the easiest of them is going to be the one that asks you for the main idea, okay? And it's very important because, as we've mentioned before, you don't want to get easy questions incorrect, because that's going to hurt your score a lot. Okay, now number 3, the main idea should always be general. Stay away from examples. If they give you an example, and we're going to practice this later on, if they give you an example in the reading, that example should not be part of the main idea, because the example is just that. It's a little small example. It's not the important part. The main idea is made out of 2 things, position and topic, none of which are specific, right? Both of them are broad, okay? They're very general. And of course, when you have your main idea, we've talked about this before also, once you finish reading this passage in under 3 minutes, or 4 in case you are talking about a long passage, right? But usually 3 minutes, then you need to get the main idea on your own, right? You should think about what the main idea is like. Okay, so of course, once they ask you for the main idea, that's something that you should already have, okay? So there should be no need to go back to the passage. Okay? For example, how do you identify questions that ask you for the main idea? Here, the passage is primarily concerned with. Okay, so that's question about a main idea, right? The passage primarily concerned, basically the main idea. Number 2, the primary purpose of the passage is the same thing. They're asking you about the main idea. Okay, so this is the most important question, and we're going to practice it in the next section of this video, all right, where we are going to answer questions for 2 reading passages. But before that, of course, if you haven't subscribed to the channel, subscribe right now, because if you don't, then you're missing on a lot of content that we're uploading and that people find quite useful. Okay. Now, the second type of question is exact questions. All right, something that's literal. Okay, exact questions basically when they ask you for something that was written, right? Written, explicitly written, explicit on the passage. That's basically these types of questions. You will need to go back to the passage, of course, because these exact questions will be specific, right? They'll ask you about a specific part of the passage, but by that time already you should already have down the whole structure of the passage. You should know what each paragraph, what information is contained in each paragraph. So it should be easy for you to go back to the passage and look for that specific information, okay? Now, you have to go back to the passage, you have to read the whole thing. Now, we're going to apply the following system. Number 1, the first thing you do is you scan the answer choices. So once you've read the question, you scan the answer choices and eliminate from memory the options that you know are incorrect. So let's say you have your question here. Of course, you get your 5 answer choices. So the first thing you do is, once you have identified that this one is an exact question, before going back to the passage, you just read these answer choices, the 5 of them, and whatever you know that is incorrect, because you're going to remember something. You might not remember the exact answer, but you're going to remember which one is false. So for example, read D and D is false, you eliminate it. Okay, that's something you want to do before you go back to the passage in order to save time. Okay, so that's the first thing you do. You eliminate the ones that are incorrect, that you know that are incorrect from memory. Number 2, you look for a keyword in the question and look for a similar keyword in the text. So for example, in the question they ask something about, let's say, something about, it's a passage about how this, the environment is being polluted by carbon dioxide, and what legislation was passed in the early 2000s. So when they mention legislation, and let's say my passage, we know that in the second paragraph they talk about the legislation, right, that they instituted in order to combat, in order to fight off pollution, then that's where you're going to focus. So you find some keywords in the question, and then you go to the passage and look for those keywords in order for you to know where in the passage it's going to be located. Okay, where in the passage your answer is likely to be at. So that's what you do as number 2. Number 3, you read the sentence in the text, and sometimes also the sentence right before and the one right after. Okay, so this is important. Let's say this is a paragraph number 2, that you believe that your answer is going to be in. All right. So what you do is you take, for example, this sentence contains the word legislation. Here. This, let's say we have sentence number 1. This sentence number 2 with the word legislation, and sentence number 3, and then we have sentence number 4 and number 5. Okay, so you shouldn't only read sentence number 2 where you find the word legislation. The best thing you can do is you have to read the sentence that's right before it. So sentence number 1, and also the sentence that is right after it, sentence number 3, because interpreting those 3 things will give you the best result possible. Okay, so you interpret those 3 things and you kind of get what they're saying. So you kind of have a little bit of context. So that's important. You have to read the sentence immediately before it and immediately after it. And then, of course, number 4, make a match. Once you have identified what they're saying, you go back to these answer choices and you choose the one that is the most similar to whatever you found. Now, examples of this type of question would be this. According to the passage, when the authors began their first studies, they were aware that. So this one is an exact question because they're saying, number 1, according to the passage, and then they were aware that, so that's something they have mentioned. Okay, they have mentioned the passage. Now, number 2, according to the passage, again, according to most of the time, according to the passage, it will indicate an exact question. Not always, but most of the time it will. Which of the following describes a result of the way in which researchers generally conduct clinical trials? So describes a result, okay, of how they conduct clinical trials. This one is an exact question also because it's going to ask about a description they've given in the passage. Okay, so these are common ways to kind of word an exact question. And now question number 3. Inference questions. Okay, inference questions, and something I forgot to mention before, exact questions tend to be intermediate. Some of them are easy, okay, and some of them are hard, but most of them are intermediate. Okay, now inference questions though, tend to be harder. Okay, very few of them are easy, very few. Some of them are intermediate and some others hard. So let's say 50-50. Right? No, not 50-50, 45-45, all right? So 45% intermediate, 45% hard, and 10% easy, something like that. Whereas exact question would be, I don't know, 70% here, 15 here, and 15 here, something like that. Okay? So inference questions are harder, and this is important for you to know. So in case you are already taken simulations, mock exams for the GMAT, and you are having problems with time, the question you should skip, if you are planning on skipping questions, would be the inference question, because that's the hardest one, okay, out of the batch. So, answering inference questions, you will need to go back to the same thing as an exact question. So once you read the inference question, you go back to the passage. But before that, you have to apply the system for exact questions. So basically, you read the question, then you think, you try to remember which ones are false to eliminate the ones that are false. After you've eliminated some, then you find a keyword, then you go back to the passage and you try to make the match. Now, the difference is that what's the difference in an inference? We know that an inference is not necessarily not necessarily written, right? Written down. So an inference is more like an interpretation, something that has been suggested but not mentioned. So here you have to apply all your theory for critical reasoning, because it's the same theory we used for our inference questions in critical reasoning. So of course, by this time you should have already watched our complete lesson for critical reasoning. If you haven't, then go back to the lesson, because there you will learn several tips and tricks to find the inference, okay? So that's the thing, you just have to apply critical reasoning theory. Okay, other than that, the system is basically virtually the same as the exact questions. Now, how do you identify these inference questions? For example, the passage suggests. Suggest is a keyword for inference. The Trump believes that compared to blah, 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 blah. So suggest means they really haven't mentioned it. They could have mentioned it, but not necessarily. Okay. Number two, it can be inferred. Inference, right? Keyword. From a passage that the authors initially held something. So that's also an inference. And number four, other types of questions. So there are actually several other types of questions that are very uncommon, but the two most common are except questions. Any of the exact or inference questions can be doubled with the word except, in which case they're going to be asking you which one. For example, if they say all of these are inferences except one, so all of them will be inferences, so you have to choose the one that is not an inference. It's the opposite, okay? Except questions are always time consuming. Most of these questions except tend to be easy or intermediate to resolve. The problem though is that they are always going to be time consuming, okay? So that makes them a good candidate for skipping. Okay, so if you want to skip an except question, usually it's going to take you a long time to solve. So yeah, they are annoying. They're annoying questions. Number two, strengthen and weaken. So these question types for critical reasoning could also appear on a reading comprehension passage. So apply the same theory as in critical reasoning. Sometimes they're just going to ask you to strengthen something or weaken something, right? As they would in critical reasoning. Okay, and these questions are always considered difficult. Of course, when you see a reading passage to the left and then you get a question here, and that question is strengthening or weakening, that means you are in front of a very difficult question most of the time. Usually it's going to be a little more difficult than the actual critical reasoning one, because you're going to get less time than in critical reasoning. Remember that for critical reasoning you have 2 minutes per question. Now, in order to solve this critical reasoning question inside a reading comprehension passage, you're going to get only 1 minute. So that alone makes it much harder. But also because the passage is longer. So you will take some time in order to kind of identify the location of the answer. Okay, so these questions are difficult, believe me. And that also makes them a good candidate for skipping. So if you need to skip questions, never skip the main idea. Try not to skip the exact questions, but you could skip these other questions, strengthen, weaken, except questions, and maybe also the inferences. Okay? Alright, so we're done with the theory chapters. If you're liking this video, I invite you to subscribe to the channel, click on the notification bell, and also give us a thumbs up. Okay? And now we're going to start practicing. Get ready for the practice. Apply everything we've gone over. Okay? Apply everything we've covered in this lesson and you'll do good. Okay, there you're gonna follow me when I show you the answer, but try to do it on your own. Okay, so finally the time has come for you to apply everything you've learned on this lesson. Okay, so here we have a reading, our first reading. There are going to be 3 questions associated with this reading. I'm going to give you 3 minutes for you to finish reading and then 1 extra minute to answer the first question. Okay, after you answer the first question, then I'm going to change the slides to the next question, question number 2. You're going to get 1 minute to answer it also, and then 1 more minute for the last question. All right, 3 questions overall, a reading passage, a total of 6 minutes. And then I'm going to go over the answers with you. So 3, 2, 1, let's start. Okay, perfect. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to write a little summary. Okay, my notes for this will be: several scholars indicate the development of the United States Vietnam War fostered an active alliance between two unions and black workers. All right. So here we have scholars indicate what? So the Vietnam War, the U.S. right? Actually foster an alliance. I think that's the best word, the trigger word. Okay, between two parties. What? Unions and black workers. It's black here, blacks. Okay. Now, an association that strengthens the civil rights movement. Okay, these scholars believe the post-war downfall accounted for the greatest lost opportunity. So they also believe, second belief, downfall was a lost opportunity. Okay, that's what they think. Okay. On the other hand, however, other scholars, all right, scholars. So I'm gonna say this scholar A is scholar B. Other scholars think otherwise. Okay. Organized labor is preferring white workers at all times. They say that organized labor. So I'm imagining organized labor are unions. They prefer whites. They always prefer the whites all along. Okay, so predominance over other minorities, including blacks. So they didn't care about the minorities, they just care about the white people. Okay. Correspondingly, these two viewpoints are bodily contradictory, but the social reality cannot be reduced to one or the other. So here is our position. For me, my position is going to be reality can't be reduced to one or the other. None of them cannot be reduced. So basically the author is saying none of them are correct. None of them are totally correct. So they might be partially correct, but not totally. Neither of the two. Okay. Labor unions were in a dilemma between maintaining blah blah blah, inclusive work blah blah blah, and positions. While union leaders declare this novel idea, unions favoring great interests. So here explanation. Okay, so that's all my notes. You have one type of scholars which mentions that in the United States during the Vietnam War there was an alliance between unions and blacks, and that it was a good alliance, but then once it was lost, once it decreased, it was a lost opportunity. However, you get other scholars who mentioned that organized labor unions always preferred white people and they were not really protecting the minorities. And then the position of the author is that the reality is neither of them. I mean, both of them are partially correct, but not totally correct. And then he proceeds to explain a little more. Okay, so those are my notes. Let's go here to the questions. Question number 1. Main point. What is the main point here? Of course, the author has a position. His position is that the reality is not, it cannot be, he says here, cannot be reduced to one or the other. This is a position of the author. Okay. Position regarding what? Regarding these two viewpoints. So he is mentioning the two viewpoints are not totally correct, and he's providing a further explanation on that. So to providing a framework to evaluate opposing viewpoints about a historical event, that could be the answer. Considering evidence used to strengthen a particular interpretation or historical event. Not really. Why? Because he's not favoring either of them. He doesn't like any of them. Right? He doesn't like neither of them. So he's not favoring one over the other. So that's out. Analyzing the merits and drawbacks of a controversial theory about a historical event. No, because here he's talking about two theories, two viewpoints. Letter C only mentions one controversial theory in singular. So that's out. Identify a flawed assumption. Underline one interpretation. Again, the author is not criticizing one interpretation. If anything, he's criticizing both of them. So that's out. Letter B, praising the historical importance of a development of a wartime alliance. It doesn't go with this. However, it doesn't go with cannot be reduced, which is also the author doesn't agree with any of the two previous viewpoints. So that's out. And letter A is our answer. He's giving a framework. He's giving some explanation, framework, to evaluate two opposing viewpoints. Okay, what are the two opposing viewpoints? Well, the two scholars, right? Scholars 1 and scholars 2. Okay, so he's telling you how you should evaluate those two opposing viewpoints. So our answer here, letter A. Let's go to the next one. According to the passage, scholars mention the first highlighted portion of the text, and scholars mention in the second highlighted portion. Disagree about what? Disagree about the relationship. We already know the answer, right? The relationship of that alliance. If there was truly an alliance in favor of minorities, especially the black workers, or if in reality organized labor, the unions always preferred the whites. Something like that. Okay? So they disagree about the extent to which black workers benefited from social and political changes following the Vietnam War. I don't like following the Vietnam War, because here they're talking about during, right? During the Vietnam War. During the Vietnam War. There you go. So A shouldn't be the answer. There be contribution made by labor unions to the war effort during the Vietnam War. No, that's not contribution of the labor unions. It's basically the relationship between minorities and labor unions during the Vietnam War. Improvements that members considered most important? No. Effect of the Vietnam War to the stance of unions? No. Relationship between unions and black workers during the Vietnam War? Yes. Whether in reality the unions cared about protecting minorities or not. So letter E, quite easy. This one's an easy passage. Number 3, the dilemma mentioned in the highlighted text, this one here, can be best described as the question of whether or not to. So what's the dilemma? Let's read that whole part. The exponential growth of the civil rights movement that came after the Vietnam War intensified this dilemma, forcing union leaders to face incongruities in their own procedures. Okay, let's read the sentence before. While union leaders used to declare this noble idea, in reality unions favored in great interest. What is a noble idea? Let me understand that. The sentence before. Secure merit base, protect decisions. So the noble idea is basically, here they also talk about a dilemma, right? Maintaining the pre-war status, or make the workplace more inclusive, or maintain the pre-war status. Okay, the pre-war status. So they had two choices. That's a dilemma. You either make it more inclusive, the unions, for all the workers, regardless of their race, or you keep this elitist type of structure. So that's the thing. So the dilemma, whether or not to strive for greater union participation. No, it's about the struggle of races and minorities. So that's out. Pressure management to create more, and this is not about pressure management for anything. Prioritize the recruitment of new members. This is not about new members, about minorities. Include minority workers in the membership. That could be extend full rights and benefits to all the members. Both of them. Those two are good. But the answer is going to be E. Why? Because this is not about including the minority workers. It's about giving benefits to everybody, right? Because these black workers were already unionized. They were inside the union, but they were members of the union, but they were not receiving full protection. Okay, because this union cared more about the elite status of their white workers. So the dilemma was whether or not to grant all these benefits to everybody. And that's it with this passage. Now let's go on to the next passage. Okay, so this is the second reading. You're going to have 6 minutes overall to complete the whole thing. So you read in 3 minutes and then you start answering question by question. Remember, you get 1 minute to answer each question. And after 6 minutes, we're going to go over the answers. Okay, so 3, 2, 1, let's start. Okay, so now you're gonna see me do my outline, my notes. All right, I'm gonna take notes for this. So here we have Canadian firms believe that increasing the cost of employee healthcare benefits has damaged. So the author says so Canadian firms they say that the increase in the cost of healthcare has damaged, is bad for the country's competitiveness in the global market by increasing the production costs. Bad for competitiveness. Okay. In consequence, these firms have transferred. Okay, consequence as a result. Therefore, they have transferred cost to employees. Through wage deductions. Deduct. Okay. Nevertheless, has actually hurt firms. Nevertheless, this has hurt firms. As illustration, the transfer of costs to employees' health and small employee was in what ways? Number one, threat to employee health. Right. So the health of employee, and then spike in strikes. So that's the first paragraph. Second paragraph, let's label them. Second, the cost of healthcare can be better covered. So here is a better cover. It's a keyword for a proposal. So the proposal in this case would be offer healthcare. So the firms should offer healthcare. Same method as the same way as you run a business, as you run a firm, you would run a clinic, a healthcare center. Now, for instance, stocking decision can be applied to healthcare at one major firm in the country. For example, employers. I think examples. Okay, so this passage is about, they say, the Canadian firms mention that the rise in the cost of healthcare is bad for the competitiveness, and therefore they say, or they transfer the cost of the rising healthcare to employee by deducing the wages through wage deductions, right? Nevertheless, this has actually hurt firms, so it has had the opposite effect, because number one, it threatens employee health. So somehow the employees see that their health is deteriorated because they say they don't want to get some preemptive medical attention, and it has also risen the number of strikes. So it has increased the number of strikes. Then the second paragraph is say the author is giving a proposal. He says that the firms should offer healthcare themselves, because it's the same method as getting other components for the business. And he gives some examples. So basically here we have a recommendation, so that's going to be a positive sort of position. So the author is writing this in order to give a proposal about in order to solve this problem. There's a problem with transferring this cost to employees, so the author is proposing that the firms themselves offer healthcare. So it's a question number one. The passage is primarily concerned with main idea, supporting a wildly health theory. What is a wildly health theory? We don't know, and the author is not supporting that theory. Contrasting several viewpoints about a problem, no, because the author wants to propose something. Summarizing highly praised research, so there's no research study here. Suggesting an alternative method, that could be criticizing the work, it's not negative, so this one. Suggesting the same thing as proposing, alternative method would be this idea of having the firms offer healthcare themselves. Okay. Question number two. The author of the passage asserts which of the following about managing healthcare costs in an effective manner? Okay. Suggests or asserts. Okay. Asserts. It could be an inference, for all we know. Inference. To encourage employees to use less. I'm first going to eliminate the ones that I know that are false. Okay, which are following about managing healthcare costs in an effective manner. Encouraging employees to use less healthcare benefits is the best way. This one's extreme. And also, I don't remember having read anything about asking employees to use less healthcare. So that's how. Allow employees to choose healthcare. Choose, maybe, we don't know. Firms should pass healthcare costs on to final consumers rather than to employees. Okay, firms should use methods in offering healthcare analogous to those used in securing the necessary goods for production. Okay, firms should control healthcare costs by decreasing the level of medical coverage. They don't say that, so he doesn't talk anything about decreasing the medical coverage. So that's how. Now, what is the best way to offer? According to the author, this one, right? Just as they do with other suppliers. The methods to secure goods necessary for production will also work for healthcare. So the same way they secure the goods for the production, that's going to work for healthcare. Let's see. Employees to choose healthcare plan. It's not about choosing healthcare plans. Should use methods in offering healthcare analogous. Analogous is the same thing as the same, right? Analogous is the same, similar to those who securing the goods. So this one is the answer, letter D here. Okay, and that makes a match with this one. And number 3, which of the following, if true, would provide the most support for the author's view about offering healthcare? Support. So this one is kind of a strengthen. Okay. Now we want to say that the author's recommendation in this case will work. And it's going to work because this will solve the problem that we have here. There is a problem, right? So the problem is that there are 2 things that have gone wrong. Number 1, employees they won't seek medical attention. And number 2 is that there has been a spike in strikes. Okay. Most firms do not have enough resources to make an on-site medical center cost effective. Okay, so that by no means strengthened. This one's a weaken, right? Because if this is true, then it's a bad idea to suggest this. So that's out. Number 2, many firms with on-site medical centers offer employees the option of going to clinics. Let's see that one maybe. Letter C, the cost of establishing and maintaining an on-site medical center are much higher. The costs are much higher. Okay, that's not good because that's making this suggestion less feasible. That's how. Letter D, employees of firms they've asked us to support, right? Employees of firms with on-site medical centers seek preventive healthcare and are less likely to unnecessarily postpone medical. That could be. Letter E, firms with medical centers find that employees are unwilling to help in the maintenance of establishments. So we don't care about maintenance, right? Employees are not supposed to maintain the establishment to the top. So it's between these 2. Now, which of this tells me that this recommendation, the suggestion by the author that the firm should offer healthcare will fix these problems? Maybe both of them or one of them. This one here. Letter D, because they say if you follow this recommendation, these employees, right, that in the firms that have medical centers seek preventive healthcare, and that wasn't one of the problems, right? The problem was that without these on-site medical centers, employees were not seeking medical attention, and that was increasing their costs. So letter D is our match here. Okay, so that's been it. Now, I hope you did well with these passages. That's been the lesson for reading comprehension. Again, subscribe to the channel, click on the notification bell, and leave us a comment if you have any questions, okay? A lot of people have been sending messages to us on the phone. Okay, those are only sales channels. We won't answer any, let's say, any academic question in there. If you have any questions regarding the TOEFL or the GMAT, leave a comment below, okay? Now, of course, I'm going to invite you to our classes. We offer very efficient, to the point GMAT preparation, GMAT tutoring, and you'll find information here. So if you truly are aiming at getting a really high score on the GMAT, then one of the best things you could do is to get some professional coaching, okay? And of course, we are here ready to help you out. So that's been it with me. Of course, you already know my name is Rod. I'm with Liberty Test Prep, and thank you for watching.